Hey guys, it's Gote here. Before the video begins, I want to start off with saying that if any of you have any stories of your own, please do not hesitate to send me them via my personal email, which will be linked in the description below. If you want to follow me via my multiple social media platforms, those will be linked in the description below as well. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into these creepy cryptid stories. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Here's a little backstory. From late 2003 to the summer of 2005, my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, and I lived in a haunted apartment in the Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago, by the corner of Melrose and Broadway. When we first moved into this apartment, I often felt like I was being watched and sometimes had a sense of unease. But I was young, 23 when we first moved in, and a senior in college, so I blamed the feelings on stress and the layout of the apartment, which was a typical Chicago 4+1. We were on the second floor, right over the garage, and our living room window faced the living room window of another apartment. That apartment and mine almost always kept the blinds shut. At that time, I did not really believe in the paranormal. I'm the sort that has to see something myself before I even believe it, and once I do see it, I analyze it endlessly. So my experience starts off when I went to bed one night, but as usual, could not fall asleep very quickly. Our two cats normally went to bed with me, but they didn't on this night. After a while, I sat up in bed and looked out the bedroom window. I can see the dining room area from bed, and if the cats were playing, they would inevitably end up in that area. Our apartment is very small, maybe about 700 square feet, if even that, and the dining room area was kind of central to the apartment layout. I hoped I would see them so I could call them over to me. It was dark, but not pitch dark, because the apartment's windows let in dim light from our neighbors across the way, as well as typical large city light pollution. So, thanks to this light, my eyes quickly adjusted to the gloom. That's when I realized there was a very dark black, like the blackest black you can think of, like blacker than black, even like velveteen tar, mass just past where the apartment's very brief hallway ended and the dining area started. It was around 7 feet tall and had a huge rough head and shoulder/torso shape, but the rest of it kind of just faded off. I wasn't alarmed at first. If anything, I leaned forward to try to get a better look, because I absolutely couldn't believe my eyes. I was baffled. But when I leaned forward and gawked at this thing, it seemed to just turn and look at me. And when it did, I saw two red eyes sunken deep into this thing's head. I did not see any other features, and I don't remember if the eyes were glowing or just plain red, but they were indeed very red. When the thing looked at me, my amazement was quickly replaced by a deep primal fear, and then it swooped through the bedroom doorway towards me. I did the only thing I could think of, and that was to duck under the covers like a kid hiding from the boogeyman. I've been in some scary situations in my life, but that particular fear was almost unearthly. The feeling actually reminded me of the intense terror you feel when you realize that the monsters in your nightmares have spotted you. After several moments, I began to run out of air beneath the covers, so I decided to elbow my sleeping husband in the ribs hard enough to irritate him and make him wake up or sit up or roll or do something. It worked, and when he didn't react strangely, I figured that the thing was gone, and it was. I, and later my husband, saw that shadow thing again, but it never again appeared remotely as threatening as it was that night. Altogether, I saw the spirit maybe 3 times over the course of my stay. It took me years to come to terms with this experience. The closest explanation I could ever come to was sleep paralysis, or the possibility of, but other than the apparition looking similar to some of my hallucinations reported during sleep paralysis, there was ultimately no similarities between the two. I had yet to fall asleep at that point and was able to move freely. The fact my husband later saw a black mass during waking hours, and I saw something else when I was awake, also helped me come to the conclusion that what I experienced wasn't due to sleep paralysis. The research I did thereafter ended up just showing not a lot. With the assistance of the Chicago History Museum Research Center, I did research on that property and that building. The apartment building was built in the early 1970s. Before that, a Jewish academy was on that site. Sometime before that, in 1940, a house that was on the site burned down, but with no deaths or even injuries. That house was once inhabited by a large family. One of their sons was a Marine and died of a disease while deployed overseas during World War I, but there's no record of that exact address prior to that. I also sent a message to the property management company asking if anyone has ever reported anything related to a haunting or paranormal. I had a hunch that the spirit moved throughout the whole building versus staying in my apartment, and I fully expected either a no or a no response from them. But to my surprise, the guy responding said that he would check out the people in the office and get back to me. A couple of days later, he said, "Actually, I've been told that they were aware of the situation, but haven't had any reports of strange activity in a few years. Hope this helps." I guess it's normal now to see 7-foot black masses with red eyes. It might just be a ghost, or worse yet, Mr. Mothman. I was walking to meet up with my friend. I live in Connecticut, so as far as I know, there's nothing up here that could be a cryptid or unknown to us. Well, I was walking at around 11 p.m. to go meet up with my friend and chill for a little bit. I approached his house, and specifically the garage, because I cut through the yard. As I come closer to the garage, I notice my friend. It was him. I did our call, which is a ch-ch sound, and this thing just looked at me with his face. Every detail was the same, and it was a full moon that night, and I could see him very clearly. I got closer, called his name, and he, or it, gave no response. I just thought he was being a freak and fucking with me, so I continued on my way and Snapchatted him asking what the hell he was doing. He shortly sent me a Snapchat picture of him at a bowling alley in a town about 30 minutes away. This was all within 5 to 10 minutes of the sighting. I never saw anything again, but from then on I wasn't much of a night person anymore. I still can't shake that eerie and dreadful feeling I had when I saw that thing. I tend to not talk about that subject because of how much it genuinely scares me. I still can't think of what that thing was, but it mimicked the appearance of my friend. This experience has seriously freaked me out, and I still refuse to walk alone at night. So, I used to live in a very old-fashioned farmhouse. I was asleep at the time, but my sister had woken up at 3 a.m. to get ready for work. She worked on my uncle's dairy farm, so she had to get up early every morning. She walked past my room and said to me that she heard very creepy, deep laughing. I sleep in silence and wasn't awake at the time. She brought this up to me, and I told her I woke up bleeding due to long scratches down my back and random bruises on my legs. Also had instances of hearing footsteps in my room when it was just me and things falling off the shelves on their own. Lots of creaking and scratching noises coming from the ceiling, but I figured it was just mice or bats in the attic. I had horrible insomnia all throughout my life and often woke up with bruises and scratches, but this was the first time they had bled. I always thought I did it to myself in my sleep. All of it actually stopped instantly when we moved 5 years ago. No more scratches, no more bruises, and no more insomnia. Really makes me second guess if I was the one causing that to myself. So, this story was not much seen, but rather heard. So here's my backstory. I grew up in the mountains. My parents owned a large number of horses and would often do pack trips out in the mountains. My job was to wrangle the horses in the morning. We let them out to graze in the evening. The horses wore cowbells to make them more easier to find. Sometimes they would be hours away from camp. One morning, the horses had wandered a considerable distance and I was having trouble finding them. I hiked into an area with an old thick forest and was beginning to get frustrated. I was still unable to find them and did not want to return to camp without finding these horses. In the distance, I heard the bells. Perfect. I followed the sound to the edge of a winding creek. Then the bells suddenly just stopped. Out of nowhere, I heard the bells in a different direction, so I followed the noise. Maybe the water carried the sound, perhaps? I could hear the bells while I was wandering through the woods, and each time it would lead me to a different edge of a creek, darker and deeper into the woods, and then it would just stop. This happened about 3 to 4 times before I finally listened to my gut and got the hell out of there. The disturbing part of all of this was that when I returned to camp, the horses had wandered back on their own, a very rare occurrence, and all had been accounted for. The Aboriginal trail hands told me that they believed in a mischievous spirit trying to lure me away until I was hopelessly lost. I was in southeast Missouri at a friend's lake house. We had rode an ATV with a small trailer down and around the lake to deal with some beavers or something blocking some drainage area. There were about 4 of us. 2 rode on the ATV and myself and another buddy rode on the trailer. We walked from the parked ATV down to the edge of the lake. The 2 who rode on the ATV brought the rifle down a bit from where we had walked. My friend and I were about 75 yards from the ATV when we suddenly saw something approach the ATV from the nearby tree line. It was stark white, like an albino animal of sorts. It was about as big as the ATV, and it had the general shape of a mountain lion, but it had a very fluffy tail, like a wolf or maybe a coyote. It sniffed around the ATV for about 10 seconds and stared at us. Then it sulked slowly back into the woods. I'm an avid outdoorsman, was an Eagle Scout, and have spent a lot of time in the woods, but I've never seen anything like it since. I'd imagine an albino, mangy mountain lion that was in a relatively populated area. There was a general store and a deli that was about 5 to 10 minutes drive from the lake house. Someone would have absolutely heard it, but no one ever did. I feel like it was a cryptid of sorts, or maybe an undocumented animal, but I can't prove it. The weird thing about all of this was just how perfectly white it was. It didn't have any dirt on its fur or anything. It was pristine white, kind of like snow. I don't know. Hey guys, it's Gote here. I want to share with you guys a personal encounter I've had growing up with a cryptid. There's this one day where my brothers and I were walking to elementary school. I think I was 8 or 9. I can't really pinpoint, but we were on the way to school when we heard this insect-like buzzing, and it was loud, like loud. And this was prior to the era of drones, so I can't really cough it up to drones, but we were looking around trying to find the source of this sound when, I shit you not, we see a foot-long dragonfly. Now, I can't really trust the memory of my 8-year-old or 9-year-old self, but it was a very vivid memory, and my brothers as well very particularly remember this experience. But if any of you have your own cryptid stories, please do not hesitate at all to send me them via my personal email, which will be, I just hit my fist on my table. Send them to me via my personal email, which will be linked in the description below, and I'll be sure to put them in one of my videos. So thank you all so much for watching. Stay safe out there. It's getting hectic. If we band together, we'll get through this. But thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you mates in the next episode.